Let's take a look.
Welcome back to the second devlog. In the first devlog I added the playable character and set up a simple shooting mechanic, but for this devlog I was excited to add a lot of new content, mostly mechanics that really begin to make the game fun to play. But first I decided to fix the shooting, as at the end of the last video, the character would rock back and forward when going between aiming the gun. This was an easy fix, you just had to fix the condition for transitioning into an animation state. Basically, because of an AM boolean, the animation blueprint couldn't determine whether aiming was true or false. Boring stuff, but talking about boring stuff, I decided to add menus in the game early because I wanted to set up pause and saving, which is important to get in the game early on because you have to save variables as you work on the game throughout the entire production. I added a HUD widget to warn the player that they could lose progress before exiting to the menu. And I set up all of the graphics settings so the player could set the graphics to what their PC can handle. I added audio settings which don't save to the world level yet, but will when I add it to the game instance later. But for now I added 2 animations for turning on the spot, and I tweak it later so it doesn't look so wacky. This is when I added a boolean for triggering whether the crosshair is true or false, but I changed this later by setting it to the player speed. But instead of just leaving everything for later, I finally added the saving functions. This wasn't too hard until I had to save to multiple slots, when I had to use a lot of brain power, but how it works is a bit convoluted. Basically, when you save to a slot, it saves all of that data that needs to be saved to that slot, but when loading that slot, it saves that slot to the first slot, and then loads the first slot, which isn't the first slot because the first slot is the autosave slot, and the first save slot you can save to is actually the second slot, and when you exit to the main menu, it saves the current state of the variables to the autosave slot. And to keep things simple, I made a function for each slot, which is 8 functions, 4 of them for saving and the other 4 for loading, which I have to update for every new variable on one of the saving and loading slots, which I then have to hit Ctrl C and then Ctrl P to copy and paste to the other 6 functions, and then the third slot is the... Wait a second, I'm lost. Well, it doesn't matter, okay, the saving function, it works, it's in the game, and that's all that matters, you know, and let's move on. So now that saving is in the game, I made a game instance just so I can move the audio and control settings edited by the player between the main menu level and the world level, which also saves automatically when exiting to the main menu or when you save to a slot, so you don't have to set it every time the player opens up the game. I removed walking when pressing shift and added it to a walk zone for a hit collision, so I can only activate walking when the player is in the spaceship, for example, which also deactivates the equipped gun and other modes I add later. I wanted to remove walking on shift so I could add a sprinting mechanic, which also activates parkour mode, but you can still jump while walking. So this is when I added the crosshair, which spreads dynamically as it is attached to the player's speed. I added an ammo system for the gun. I set up a basic line trace for destroying the AI actor to set up my shooting mechanic. As I added bullet holes for the laser projectile in the last devlog, the projectile doesn't hit the middle of the crosshair, which is why I added the line trace which spawns the projectile, and the projectile will follow the end hit location of the line trace, which allows me to draw happy faces and this cool skull on the wall, but they despawn every 60 seconds, so you better be fast. I then also added spark particles at the hit location for impact. I added multiple modes you can cycle through: laser sword combat, jetpack, and electric gloves. I then began working on the sword combat, which toggles the camera onto the AI enemies. But with this added, it wouldn't look cool without some animations, so I got to animating. So I implemented the animations into the game and used the laser particle material on the cube to act as a placeholder for the laser sword. I added parry left and right if you press the parry button when moving left or right, and I added a slash animation, which right now can destroy the actor as I haven't set up AI health yet. I then added animations for activating and deactivating the laser sword. And one day I got bored and just started doing some relaxing texturing as a break from game design. And this small break gave me the motivation to add this really cool sliding animation for the parkour mechanic. Moving on to the jetpack mechanic, which I forgot to record, I guess. I needed a jetpack model as I was just using a cube up until now. So I 3D modeled, UV unwrapped and textured a jetpack that looks like it was designed to be some sort of futuristic toaster. But before I added the jetpack to the game, I had to texture some mask textures for a fire particle to come out of the jetpack thrusters. So once I made those, I then made a cool particle for the fire, and I also turned off the disgusting motion blur which has been on this entire time. I only noticed it after adding the fire particle, which moved so fast that the motion blur made it look like a smear, which was not what I wanted. I then animated this sweet 540 round kick along with some other animations for the electric gloves mechanic. I then added this simple swimming mechanic. I started 3D modeling and texturing the shotgun for other gun choice to start out with. I decided to reuse the hover car model from the short film, but I will probably have to retexture it later since I had to optimize it for my game because the film model had almost 200,000 vertices. But for now I baked the textures down to a single texture which looks very low res. I started the shotgun mechanic by adding multiple line traces which spread randomly within a spread value, and the shotgun only shoots within a low to mid range, whereas the other laser gun has a much larger range. Going off of a basic concept I made in 3D Paint, I sculpted the map to look similar to with a few hills just for now, but I will improve the map sculpt in the next devlog probably. This is when I moved on to creating my favorite mechanic so far, just on top of the jetpack mechanic. A hover car mechanic which uses 4 line trace components to calculate how far the car should be to the ground. I also added a flip and boost mechanic to make driving the hover car more fun than it already was. I also like how it slowly slides down hills. I made it just so you despawn when entering the car and spawn again on exit. I also added a widget for displaying interacting with the box collision so the player gets prompted to enter the vehicle with heads up display. So I optimized and retextured the hover car and spaceship to run better in game. I scaled the spaceship up so the interior won't have to be so small. It also allows you to also walk under to access the ramp to the spaceship. I set up overlap box collisions the player can interact with to enter and exit between interior levels, which aren't separate levels because I decided to just set up the interiors under the map. So when you enter and exit these interiors, it just teleports the player to these locations. I then 3D modeled and textured a mechanic garage building that I then added to the world level to have an area to keep the hover car and the spaceship. On the hover car, the camera kept clipping through the ceiling, so I set up a box collision which when entered changes the height of the camera's spring arm and sets back to the default height when exiting. This is how the LOD mesh display looks right now. Every time there is a color change on an object, it roughly halves the vertex count by half. I'm doing this to learn about levels of detail instead of just enabling nanite and calling it a day, because using LEDs is more reliable as nanite might be inaccurate, and using LEDs is just easier for me to understand and change if I needed to use a custom LED or change the screen size manually. And that's everything I was able to make for the second devlog. For the third devlog, I will be expanding on the art for 3D modeling and animating the characters and building a layout for blocking out the open world map. I'll be making a start on the AI characters, adding customizable features. I should polish unfinished mechanics like the electric gloves, adding simple parkour and more. But that's all for now. Please like and subscribe if you found these devlogs entertaining. Check out the second channel for film related content, and until next time, see you later.